Hi, everyone. When I went live this morning, I completely forgot that I was going live again later this morning, early this afternoon. And I was like, oh, yay, I get to come talk to them twice. This is exciting. So, hi, hello, how are you? Say hi as you're coming on so I can say hi back. Are you hydrated? Are you comfortable? Are you in a good position? Do you need a blanket? Do you need a sweatshirt? Do you need to unbutton your pants? Because sitting in too tight clothing or not enough clothing or in uncomfortable positions is not how we roll. Not anymore, right? So just an invitation to make sure you're watered, you're fed, you're comfortable before we can begin. Hello, hello. Holly, hi, Keisha. So today we're going to be talking about overwhelm. Hey, Amber. We're going to be talking about being stuck in the freeze trauma response. And oh, good. People are in bed and they're jammies, they're comfortable. That's what I like to hear. So the freeze response. Just a little for people who are new here, who haven't watched any of the lives before, because we've been kind of doing these in like a series stepwise fashion. The freeze trauma response is something that only happens in certain situations, only happens in response to certain criteria. Okay, so we have already chatted through the first 3 trauma responses, which you can go back and look in the group and you can search for fight, you can search for flight, and you can search for fawn. So we've talked through fight, and we've talked through flight, and we've talked through fawn. And these 3, if you remember, little recap, are active states in which we are feeling threatened, or something in our environment is reminding us of a past threatening experience that we were in, that we didn't process, that was stored in our body as traumatic. So either something highly traumatic is happening right now, or something that reminds us of something traumatic that we've been through before is happening. And our body with fight, flight, and fawn is going, okay, I am not helpless. I can fight this thing off with my words, or with my body language, with my actual strength, right? I can run, I can flee, I can get away from this, I can escape. Or I can manipulate my way out, right? Fawning is manipulation. Fawning is changing the way that this other person feels, trying to make them happy, trying to please them so that they become less of a threat, right? Now every human, by the way, goes through, when we get something threatening in front of us, our brain, our nervous system runs through this list of what can I try? And for many of us, our nervous systems have gotten so used to being in situations where we feel helpless, especially as children, where our nervous system, when it experiences a threat, very rarely goes to fight or flight or fawn, and very often drops into freeze. And so we're going to talk about what freeze is, because freeze is where trauma starts to get stuck. Freeze is the state of freeze and the subsequent states of fade and faint. As we get into freeze and fade and faint, this is where trauma gets stored in the body. This is why situations that you go through that trigger a freeze response are re-traumatizing, because what we've gone through in the past has caused us to go into freeze, and now our default threat response is freeze. And the problem with freeze is that freeze is an incredibly helpful threat response if it is completed. And we'll talk about what that means. But most of us, when we go into freeze, do not complete our threat response. And so an incomplete threat response causes the storage of trauma in the body, causes the brain to understand the world in a different way. And so if you are somebody who gets stuck in freeze and who doesn't have a system for completing that threat response, you're going to have a lot of re-traumatization, and unfortunately, this has a snowball effect. So the more we go to freeze as a response, the more trauma gets stored, the more littler and tinier and more easily triggered things happen around us, to the point that sometimes something that is completely non-threatening feels threatening to our nervous system because it's been kindled. That fire has been stoked. So when we think of animals, right, who go through fight and flight and fawn, some animals do fawn, mammals fawn. When they go into freeze, freeze is essentially playing dead, right? Freeze isn't just playing dead too. It's interesting that we use that language for animals where we say they're playing dead, because these animals are actually not playing. They have no conscious choice over the fact that they are choosing, they're not choosing to freeze. They're not choosing to play dead. Their nervous system is basically overriding all of the other threat responses and saying, we're helpless. We are in a situation where we are helpless. And so since we are helpless, we are going to have a state in which our body freezes. Our body, our autonomic nervous system, goes into a completely different state than it would be in if it was in fight or flight or fawn. And so what happens in freeze is something called tonic immobility. And y'all have felt this. A lot of people think freeze is where your brain stops thinking, where you dissociate, where you go somewhere else. And while that happens later on, freeze doesn't require dissociation. And most people, when they experience freeze, what they are experiencing is that their mind is racing. Their mind is still very much working, but their body is stuck. And so this is what happens to animals when they freeze, when they play dead, is their body is totally still. Their body pumps out endorphins, feel-good chemicals, into pain-killing chemicals into the body in preparation for the fact that they might get killed and eaten, and they want that to be less painful. But their mind is still aware. Okay. So when animals play dead, when animals go into this freeze state, what you'll notice with animals is that if the predator that wanted to kill this thing is like, oh, this thing's already dead, or this thing just died in front of me, maybe it's sick, maybe it's poisoned, I don't think I I don't know that I want to try to eat this thing. It's more fun for me to kill it and then eat it. If it's already dead, I don't know, right? If that predator goes away, when the threat response is over, if that animal is not killed, what you will notice almost across the board is that animal, as its body starts to wake up, will have a huge discharge of energy. And what I mean by that is that they will shake, they will violently tremble, they will run, and they will discharge, they will rid the body of all of that energy that just got stored during that threat response. Because it wasn't able to fight and use energy that way. It wasn't able to flee and run away and use energy that way. It wasn't able to fawn and manipulate and use energy that way. And so all of that energy was sitting stagnant in that body as it was frozen. The neurotransmitters, the chemicals, the hormones that were dumped into that animal's body in preparation to help it fight, flee, or fawn are still present when that animal comes out of the freeze response. And so the animal instinctually knows, the body instinctually knows, I need to discharge this out. Okay. So the interesting thing about humans is that when we are in threatening situations where we feel helpless, where we feel like we can't get away, we feel like we can't fight, we feel like we can't manipulate, and we freeze, when we come out of our freeze responses, when it's safe, when the predator, aka dad or mom or an older brother or a bully at school or someone, goes away, when the threat ends, as humans, we have been conditioned out of discharge of that emotion and those chemicals. We have been conditioned out of going through trembling, shaking, running, getting that energy out of our body. And so all of those chemicals, all of those hormones, that experience is stored in the body, is remembered by the body because it hasn't been released. It hasn't been discharged. And the other thing that happens is that this changes the wiring. This actually, over time, getting stuck in freeze response over and over without a subsequent discharge changes the way your body and your brain work. The parts of your brain that determine if something is a threat or not get dysfunctional. The parts of your brain that typically talk to each other in these situations start having issues communicating. And so over time, this causes some pretty significant problems. And not just from a physiological and neurological standpoint, but also thinking about this from a learned helplessness standpoint. If anyone had to take a sociology or a psychology course in high school or in college, you may have heard of this, learned helplessness, right? Up until, gosh, not very long ago, we thought that brains were like, they were fixed. Like it's the term old dogs can't learn new tricks. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? We thought that when you learned things, that was how it was. And so we thought that humans who had gone through experiences like this, that were helpless, that displayed signs of feeling like they were helpless, were stuck. We thought that that wasn't something we could change. And this did a huge disservice to a lot of populations, a huge disservice to a lot of populations. And what we know now is that our brain has the capability for neuroplasticity, meaning the ability to intentionally, as humans, we can intentionally cause neural connections between neurons and cells to die, to like be cut off, to be pruned is the term we use, and we can create new neuronal connections. So this is reprogramming of the mind, reprogramming of the brain. And what people who experience learned helplessness simply have had neuronal connections made around the fact that they've gone into freeze response often. And so they've learned the way to survive is to be helpless. And to add insult to injury here, People who experience learned helplessness at an early age, people who experience trauma where they truly were helpless, right? They were pinned in a car. They were held down by someone. They were a really small kid being experiencing trauma from a big adult, a caregiver, right? Those are all situations where we are helpless or where we can feel helpless. In the freeze state, like I just said a few minutes ago, our body pumps endorphins into our system. Our body pumps pain relieving chemicals into our system. And so for a lot of us who have experienced significant trauma, the freeze response actually starts to feel good. The body gets, I don't want to use the word addicted, but the body begins to expect those feel-good hormones as a result of traumatic situations. And so healing trauma, discharging trauma, working this through the body, starting to think about things in different ways, moving out of what we might quote unquote call victimhood or a learned helplessness mentality. I'm stuck here. I can't do anything about this. This is just how my life is. The reason it is so hard to get out of those states sometimes is because they actually feel good. And so when we can approach people who have a fixed mindset, this is who I am, this is how I am, this is my character, right? When we approach people who have learned helplessness, I can't do anything about this. I'm stuck here. And when we approach people who oftentimes really don't advocate for themselves or who continue to participate in behaviors that aren't helpful to them from a place of trauma, we can experience and feel so much more compassion for that, knowing that it actually probably feels very, very uncomfortable and possibly even, for lack of a better word, bad. It feels painful to come out of that state. So let's talk about what freeze actually looks like in your life, right? Have you ever had one of those moments where you're sitting and you're scrolling on social media and your brain is just like going and going and going, and it's like, hey, we need to get up and do these things. I actually had this happen to me yesterday. I was sitting here in the middle of like a chunk of 4 hours of calls, and they were all pretty intense. I was holding space for some really big space for some people. And I had like a 15-minute or 30-minute period, a break in those 4 hours. And so I sat here and I just sat here for like 15 minutes. And I did fade a little, which we'll talk about later on. I did fade a little. I did start dissociating a little bit because my brain was like, oh my gosh, we have to make the grocery list for Thanksgiving. And we're making all of these different foods because we're gluten-free now. And so like, we have to make recipes different. Okay. And then I have to actually go to the store when I normally order my groceries online, because I don't know exactly what kind of things there are and what I need. And there's like 6 loads of laundry, and oh my gosh, I also have to write the email campaign for tomorrow, and I have to do this, and I have to do that, and I have to do this, right? And all of a sudden my brain was like, there's too much, we can't handle this. And I went into immobility. Like I just sat here. I just sat here kind of like mindlessly doing things, but not really moving, right? Not really moving. And my brain was going a mile a minute. That, my friends, is freeze. Because the internal message, the past painful experiences I was associating with right here are feeling like there was just too much to do. And I was not good enough to handle all of the things. There was a little bit of perfectionism coming in of like, oh my gosh, what if I make these recipes for my family and they don't like them? I'm the one making the sides because my mother had surgery and can't bend and lift and twist. And like, what if I ruin them? And this wasn't all happening consciously, but the level of overwhelm I was feeling was so high that I was stuck. And luckily, I recognized what was happening. After about 12 minutes. And I texted my husband and I was like, hey, can you tell me to get up and go get some water and go get some food, and to like that it is okay if after that I just sit here for 15 minutes until my next call is over. He was like, yeah, like get up, go get some water, right? And maybe you've been there. Maybe you have to go to the bathroom. Maybe you're really thirsty. Maybe you're really hungry and you're sitting there and it's not like you're in a flow state. You're not in a flow state where you're like, man, I'm like crushing it and I'm doing all these things and this feels really good and I'm like so excited and I don't want to get up because I feel like I'm in the zone. This is an entirely different feeling. This is I can't move. And by the way, if anyone in here has experienced depression, if anyone in here has experienced significant depression or anxiety symptoms, the freeze response is innately tied to those disorders, to those diagnoses. People who have treatment refractory depression, when they are studied with this from this trauma lens, the level of learned helplessness is often very high. And the level of unprocessed trauma and the level of freeze response and dissociation is also very high. As somebody who had a diagnosis of depression from the age of, and anxiety from the age of 9, someone who started having panic attacks at the age of 9, pretty early, that's 26 years. I will say that I had anxiety-induced depression. I experienced anxiety-induced depression where I was having a lot of what we now know to be complex PTSD symptoms that were causing intrusive thoughts and emotional flashbacks, and that we thought were panic attacks, but really weren't. And that I felt so helpless around that we were trying all these things and nothing was working, and we were trying different meds and we were doing this stuff, and I was having, these pretty significant symptoms like on a consistent basis. And like by the age of 14, felt so helpless around it that I ended up with a diagnosis of depression and started on, that was a 20-year journey from there on. And what I learned is that my depression was really tied to the fact that I felt helpless around these other symptoms I was having. And it was like, God, like, why would I want to get out of bed if this is how I'm going to feel all day, right? So the freeze response came out from the overwhelm of experiencing those things. So I like to bring that in here. It's uncomfortable for me to talk about. It's a vulnerable thing for me to talk about, but I like to bring that in here as somebody who now does not identify with the diagnosis of depression and who has much, much better command and experiences around my anxiety and around emotional flashbacks and around my complex PTSD symptoms. Like, doing this work of recognizing I'm actually not helpless. There are things that I can do. There are treatments and experiences that work to help me in this. And I can catch myself in a freeze response and be really gentle with myself and find ways, gentle, grace-filled ways to help myself move out of that response. So, noticing when you feel helpless noticing when you feel like you don't have agency, noticing when you feel like you are out of control is really, really huge in noticing freeze. Because freeze, if left unchecked, leads to fade. And fading is where we start dissociating, right? It's where we start mentally checking out. It's where our bodies kind of shut down and our brain starts going to other places because it's so uncomfortable to stay in our bodies. If we can catch ourselves in these helpless moments, these moments of feeling helpless, of feeling out of control, of feeling like we don't have agency, and finding even one tiny thing that we can do, one thing we can be in control over, one thing we can feel like we have agency around, one thing that we can like take command of. This is huge. So right there, I know that my husband is a safe person. I know that he understands trauma. I know that he understands the freeze response. And so I can text him and be like, help me move. And even having him be like, get your butt out of the chair, lovingly, right, is helpful. Sometimes he'll come upstairs and just be like, stand up. And I'm like, oh, fine, right? Like, I don't want to. My body doesn't want to. But having him be like, stand up, let's get some water. Let's go, let's move, let's do the thing, right? Very, very helpful. Sometimes for me, when I notice a client that is really stuck in freeze, when I notice a client who's stuck in freeze, one of the things that I'll do is I'll say, hey, can you like, if their eyes are off to the left, I'll say, can you just take your eyes and like shift them to the right for me if that feels safe? And they'll do that. And I'll be like, great. Can you take them back over to the left? Okay, now can you take them back over to the right and the left and the right? Awesome. Okay, now can we just like turn our head a little bit? Okay, cool. Great. Awesome. Is there any other movement that would feel good here? Do you need some water? Do we need to get some food? Do you need to stand up and stretch? Do you need to change chairs? Like, what do you need? Right? And as I start asking them, what do you want to do here? It pulls us out of the helplessness. It pulls us out of the helplessness because we're making choices about how we are moving our bodies. So learning how to very gently get yourself out of the freeze response is huge here. So somebody was mentioning, that they freeze in their business. Maybe the thing that you do, if you notice that you freeze in your business or you dissociate around your business, meaning that like you open your computer to work on work and then end up on Facebook for an hour or Instagram for an hour or watching cute puppy videos for an hour or doing other things that aren't actually what you meant to do. Again, it comes to grace and noticing like, where am I feeling helpless in my business? What is feeling helpless around this? So with the grocery store, I recognize like, oh, there's a lot of things that I'm feeling a good amount of anxiety around. Like, I feel like I'm going to screw this up. I feel like I'm not going to do this right. Right? Okay. So I'm feeling a little helpless around this. I'm feeling like I don't have control around this. Okay, so what would help me have control? Well, let me like sit down and actually just like pull up the recipes and see if these are things that feel feasible for me to make. Let me make sure that I'm not biting off more than I can chew. Let me see if my husband and my kids want to help me cook, right? Little tiny things. So in my business, if I'm doing that, it's like, okay, what if I just sit down and I'm having trouble writing this post or like getting a chapter done on my book or whatever. So what if I just sit down and let my hands type on the keys for 5 minutes? For 5 minutes. And if nothing good comes out, it's total junk, or I don't feel motivated to keep going, I can stop. Right? I use the around the freeze, I use the 5-minute rule a lot. It's basically hey, you are fully in control here. We're going to do this thing that we want, that we think is good for us, that we know might not feel great to begin with, that we're feeling stuck in resistance around. And we only have to do it for 5 minutes. If we decide we want to do it for longer, fantastic. But if we decide that we want to be done, we can be done. And start to see how doing these tiny things where you can be in control, where you can be in command. I'm going to write one sentence of a post. I'm thinking of like my nurse practitioner days where I would have I'd have 12 notes to write, right? And I'd feel completely overwhelmed. And part of me would want to flee and part of me would just feel really stuck. Okay, let's pick the easiest note. Do we want to pick the easiest note or do we want to pick the hardest note to write first? The most complicated or the simplest? Okay, I think I want to get the most complicated one out of the way. All right, let's do that. Or, you know what? I want to write all of my assessment and plans. I want to write out all of my, what I'm going to do for each and every patient. I'm going to do that first and get all 12 of those notes, those parts of the notes written. And then I'm going to go back and fill in the rest of the information, right? A lot of times we're telling ourselves that we have to do something in a very specific way. And that specific way we feel helpless around, or we feel like we're not good at, or we feel like we don't have agency. And so giving ourselves a different creative way of doing the thing where we do feel like we have control, where we do feel empowered, can be really huge here. Really huge here. So that's in the moment of freeze. And I think we get to have a conversation with the rest of the time here around how, and actually before I go there, just checking in with everyone who's watching live, is this resonating with you? Are there any times you feel like you get stuck that you'd like me to talk about or address? Let me know how this is landing. And I'm going to take a sip of water. Not a sip. My husband's like, you chug water. Okay. So the other part of this is, and I should say, you are, as you start to do this, as you start to pull yourself out of freeze, as you start to come up with techniques and tactics to pull yourself out of freeze, and you're gentle with yourself and you're graceful with yourself, this is reparenting. You're reparenting yourself. You're setting limits and boundaries and also giving yourself nurturing around the places that you probably didn't, receive that, which is why freeze is here, right? So those, recognizing that the feel-good chemicals that are getting released in that make it easier to stay stuck, just know that as you move and as you start to move those chemicals through, you're going to create new associations. You're going to create new neural connections, and it's actually going to start feeling pleasurable. It's actually going to start feeling good to get out of freeze, to get into empowered motion, right? And by the way, motion's not always motion. Motion's not always productivity. Motion's not always, oh, I'm going to get up and go do the things. Sometimes when your brain is feeling really overwhelmed and you're feeling helpless, it's because your physical needs are not met. It's because you haven't had water. It's because you haven't eaten. It's because you're not sleeping well. It's because you need rest. And so getting into motion doesn't necessarily mean that you go do all the things and be superwoman and crush your to-do list. It can also mean, wow, I'm feeling really overwhelmed because I'm really tired. And I'm going to go take a nap. And then once the nap is done, I'm going to check in and say, okay, how do we want to do this thing? Right? So sometimes you actually need to get out of tonic immobility and get into intentional immobility, right? Which is sleep or rest or laying down. So the other half of this, like I was saying, is really starting to practice, starting to get into a safe place where you can discharge the stored experiences, where you can reteach your body how to interact with the outside world and to stop seeing things as traumatic as they are, and are as traumatic when they aren't, and to be able to learn a new way. So if you see me when I get stuck in freeze, after I get stuck in freeze, after I notice myself in freeze, a lot of times you'll see me doing this. And for my podcasters, I'm like wildly wiggling my hands, shaking my hands, moving my arms, pulling it up into my shoulders, shaking my butt in the chair, wiggling my toes. You'll see me do this. And my family actually sometimes laughs when I get activated and I'm feeling kind of like a lot of extra energy. They'll watch me and they're like, oh, she's shaking again, right? But this is me mimicking physiologically a discharge process of the chemicals that have gotten dumped in when I've gotten triggered, right? So getting up and moving and dancing, or one of my favorite things is like, and I think I mentioned this in the 10-second protocol videos earlier this morning, is like rage music, right? Papa Roach just put out this new song called Kill the Noise, and I listened to it like 7 times this morning as I was driving, and I was like, obviously being safe about it, but was moving, right? Was singing loudly because it felt good. It was the way of discharging the energy and the pent up stuff that was in my system, because I hold a lot of space for a lot of people at a very, very deep level. And as good as I am and as boundaried as I am of not taking on other people's stuff as my own, that stuff still sticks sometimes. And so having a way to move that through, having a way to have things that feel triggering and activating and move those through with movement, with breath, with sound, is really, really huge, because I'm not only making sure that I'm not storing what is happening to me in this moment, but what I'm also doing is repatterning my body and my brain so it starts to feel safe, releasing some of the stuff that we've already stored. A lot of us have a lot of stuff stored. We have a lot of stuff stored, and that is why we keep getting re-triggered. If we didn't have that implicit memory in our body, our bodies wouldn't notice things that remind us of those implicit memories and get triggered, get activated, and dump the same hormones into our body and repeat the process. That wouldn't happen. And so if in the moment I can catch, oh, wow, I'm having a threat response. Wow, I'm slipping into freeze. Wow, I'm feeling kind of helpless here, feeling like I can't control the situation. Or I want to flee, but I can't, right? I want to discharge this energy. Part of me wants to fight, and part of me wants to flee. And I know that those aren't the acceptable or the helpful responses to have here with this human in front of me who isn't actually a threat. So I need a way to move this through. So having an intentional practice, that it's not just where we wait until we're in the moment to move things through, but also after things have happened, after we've had a week where we've supported a lot of people, after we've had a lot of overwhelm, after we've had a lot of stuff. There's a reason we're doing the 10-second protocol over the holidays, y'all. There's a reason why our trip certification starts in the beginning of the year and not now, is because y'all are going through it right now. It's the end of the year. It's the holiday season. We are having lots of procedural and implicit memory from last year at this time and how stressful it was. 2 years ago around this time and how stressful it was, that things were really starting to, in the world, were starting to happen from a pandemic standpoint. And so it makes the reason why we are doing the 10-second protocol right now and practicing doing this as a group, the reason why the trip certification is starting now is because we want you to have resources and tools and ways to learn how to get out of overwhelm, how to not get stuck in the freeze response, how to complete the discharge process. Right? Which, by the way, if you're still having a hard time envisioning this, if anyone has ever watched a woman have a baby, If anyone has ever watched somebody with a uterus have a baby, right after they have that baby, having a baby is a pretty traumatic experience, could be, right? Having a baby, there is a lot of threat around that. You are completely vulnerable. Thinking about not just having a baby in the hospital setting, but how we used to have babies, oftentimes you're on your own, you are like naked, you are completely exposed, you are completely out of control of what's happening to your body. It's incredibly painful, right? There's a lot going on. And most women, if you watch them after they have the baby, they will have this complete body experience where they cannot stop shaking. I had it with both of my kids, or both of my pregnancies, I should say, with my first daughter and with my twins. And I don't remember Cool. Okay. I think I'm back. Can you guys see me now? Are we good? My internet just like decided to spaz right in the middle. Can you hear me now? Maybe. Let me know. I said something wildly inappropriate in the meantime, so hopefully y'all didn't hear that. We're gonna cut that out of the podcast. So okay, so I was saying that they had placed my daughter on my chest, and then I ended up they ended up taking her because I was shaking so violently, right? Like I was shaking so intensely, and I was like, what is going on? And I remembered seeing that when I was in nursing school. I did a rotation on labor and delivery, and sure enough, every single woman had that response, unless she was under anesthesia, right? Every single woman had that response unless she was under anesthesia. And by the way, this is why birth, especially when it is under anesthesia, when we have emergency C-sections and women get put under for those, why that can feel so dissociative and traumatic is because a lot of times that woman's body doesn't have the chance to go through that experience. So thinking about that violent, that intense tremor, think if you were able to do that, if you were able to give yourself that movement and that breath and that sound, anytime something traumatic happened to you and you weren't able to get away, you weren't able to fight, you weren't able to manipulate, if your boss screams at you in a meeting and it doesn't feel safe for you to respond back, and you can go in the bathroom and shake it out and say the things you wanted to say to him or her, and like, out loud to the bathroom mirror or whatever you need to do in order to be able to discharge that emotion, I want to give you full permission for this. I want to normalize you discharging emotion after you feel it. And I want you to normalize doing this in a safe, healthy, mutually beneficial way, right? Because we've learned, as we've talked about fighting and fleeing and fawning, that this doesn't feel like, when we fight people back, it doesn't tend to go well. When we run away and avoid, it doesn't tend to go well. And when we fawn, it doesn't tend to go well in the long run, because we end up violating our own morals and our own values to try to make someone else happy, quote unquote, happy. And it breeds resentment, it breeds victimhood, and it can take us into learned helplessness. And when we allow ourselves to go into freeze, I shouldn't say when we allow ourselves to go into freeze, when we allow ourselves to stay stuck in freeze, it doesn't feel good and it doesn't help us. And all of these responses create re-traumatization, because we're doing things that don't help us and don't feel good when we calm back down, when we become less emotionally activated, when those feelings of anxiety or anger or sadness or rage or whatever, or overwhelm, dissipate. We're not typically happy. We don't typically feel good about how we showed up in those moments. And so normalizing getting the stuff out, moving this through, completing the discharge process in a safe, healthy way is huge. Huge. And I want you all to give yourselves permission to try this. I want you all to give yourselves permission to start seeing your body as this beautiful instrument, right? That works with your soul, that is so in your brain. It's so smart. It's so intuitive. It's so knowing. It's so good at sending you messages. It's so good at connecting with you and going like, hey, something's off here. And to start giving your body, allowing your body to do what it knew how to do before you unlearned it, which is to move and to breathe and to make noise and to complete the discharge process whenever something threatening happens. And like I said, this doesn't have to happen necessarily right in the moment, but as close to the moment as it can happen as possible, as safely as possible, and to start scheduling in times where you get to do this. So like I said, our trip certification starts January. I already have several one-on-one clients. I hold space for mastermind clients. I had a membership community up until recently. The amount of space that I hold for other humans is really high, really, really high, and very, very deep, right? The capacity that I am required based on the things that the way I want to show up in this world, the way that I want to work, the ability to hold hundreds of people at a time at a deep and high level, to give them a space to safely experience their emotions, to give them a space to safely process through what's going on, to give them a space where they can learn about distressing things and tell me distressing things. The amount of trauma that I hear about on a daily basis is very, very high comparatively. And one of the things that I do is I have people, I have places, I have systems of support in my world where I can go to others and say, hey, I need you to hold space for like 20 minutes while I rage or I cry or I punch pillows or I vent or I do whatever it is that I need to do. in this safe container. I need to be able to show up and process through my own grief and the trauma that I've taken on from others and heard about, and the space that I'm holding. I need that space held for me as well. And so what I want you to hear is that if you are like, oh my gosh, I would really like to start doing this work, and it feels a little bit unsafe, like I feel like I don't necessarily have the ability or the capacity to even do that. I know there's a lot of coaches in here that want to help their clients, that want to take them to these deeper levels. And part of you is holding back because it's like, gosh, I don't know if I can hold that capacity for other humans. I know there's nurses and other healthcare professionals in here who hold a lot for a lot of people, and who also are starting to feel burned out by the requirement to hold a lot, and the inability or the absence of support around holding those things. What I want you to hear is that if that is something that you desire, if you desire a container where you can learn about these things more, where you can process through your own stuff, where you can feel safe and supported, where you can bring this stuff to us and we're not going to be like, oh my goodness, like, where we're going to be like, yeah, that's really hard. That's a lot. We're witnessing you in that. How can we support you? If that's what you desire, then I really want to invite you to think about joining the TRIPS certification. I really want to invite you to think about how that could feel. Because what we are doing with TRIPS is creating a trauma-informed, psychologically safe certification program that also gets to feel trauma-informed and psychologically safe for you. That gets to be a space where you learn all of this and you process through all of this and you start applying it to your life, but where you're deeply supported, where you have a literal support coach team that shows up for you, that is here for you, that holds space for you. We have somebody on staff who their job is to literally check in on every participant who signs up for the certification and to offer one-on-one calls if needed. We have somebody who is specifically here to help facilitate our group calls so that you feel safe and supported on those calls, where you can come and bring your questions or share your experiences and get the support or the answers or the solutions that you need. So if that is something that is intriguing you more, if you want to keep diving into learning about trauma and learning about not just, at the level that I'm teaching it here, but at a deeper level, or hearing this again and again and having the ability to hear this again and again, and actually able to ask questions and connect with other people who are going through this and have case study examples and have group support calls and have a community where you can say, hey, I went through this the other day. Has anyone else ever been through this? Do you think that this was this kind of trauma response? How would you have responded? I want you all to have the opportunity to do that. And so if you are interested, I'm going to drop the link to the TRIPS certification below. If you sign up by November 30th, I am offering a emotional release event experience. And so if you are like, oh, I don't know how I actually want to process through my stuff. I don't really know how to incorporate movement and breath and sound in a way that feels good for me. I've never done this. It feels really weird. I am going to be facilitating this and literally taking you through one of my absolute favorite ways of doing this. An event where you can feel what it feels like to release your emotions in a safe space. So if you sign up by November 30th, you will have access to that. We're going to do that mid-December. And if not, you can absolutely wait. Whatever makes the most sense for you logistically and financially. We start the first week of January, and we have accessible payment plans. So just wanted to mention that to you, if you haven't heard about the TRIPS certification yet, to really invite you in to be able to experience this with us, because we would deeply enjoy having you. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to DM me, or you can drop them on the video here. If you made it through to the end and you're on the replay, #replay, so that I can come back and say hi. To all of those of you who stayed with me online through the little glitch, thank you so much for sticking with me. It wasn't your internet, it was mine. And I will be back in here tomorrow morning for the 10-second protocol, the day 4. We're going to be practicing again as a group. If you still want to feel into things a little more before you make a decision on trips, or if you're like, nope, I know I don't want trips, I'm going to stay here for the free stuff, it's all good. So I will see you tomorrow. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.